All right, so chapter 2. So in the first chapter, there was the prophecy given that Nineveh would fall in Nahum chapter 1. And you're going to see the vision now, this masterpiece. They call this chapter a masterpiece of description because it describes an ancient battle in very vivid terms. You can actually visualize what's happening as you read the story. So try to visualize each verse. And we're going to talk a little bit about each verse, but visualize in between here. So let's start with chapter 2, verse 1, describing this vision of the destruction of Nineveh. So verse 1 says, "He that dasheth in pieces is come up before thy face. Keep the munition, watch the way, make thy loins strong, fortify thy power mightily. For the Lord hath turned away the excellency of Jacob as the excellency of Israel. For the emptiers have emptied out and marred their vine branches." So again, this book's all about the destruction of Nineveh, right? But here we're talking about Judah and Israel, because again, that's the focus. That's the comfort here. The focus of God remains the same. His focus is on the people who are going to bring forth the Messiah. The people of Israel were a nation that were chosen because of Abraham, because he was going to bring a blessing to all nations. So it's all going to come back to those who bring forth the Messiah. And what's going to happen to the people? He tells Nineveh that it was not them who destroyed the kingdom of Israel, but rather he who turned away the excellency of Jacob. He is the one who turned away the protection that was over Judah and Israel. It wasn't the strength of the Assyrians, okay? He's the one that allowed its treasures to be emptied. He's the one that allowed the vine to be destroyed. And if he can destroy the cities and the kingdoms of his own people, if God can allow the destruction of his own people, the judgment of his own people, Nineveh better bring its A game, as we call it. That's what he tells them in verse 1. He said, bring your A game.
Saying this is all he is God?
God, yes, God is the one who take away that power. Now, by the way, some translations, they say where it says he's turned away the excellency of Jacob, it says he's restored the excellency of Jacob and of Israel. I don't really know how that makes sense based on the situation they were in there, but that's just what some versions read. But I think in the sense, he's saying, look, Jacob and Israel were laid waste, and now you are going to have the same fate. That's how I read it. So now visualize those two verses, or at least the first verse in your mind. The destroyer is coming. So you're calling out, I'm reading a description paper here. The destroyer is coming. You better prepare yourself. Get your army stored up, get your weapons stored up, watch the road. Put your watchmen out there so you know when they're coming. Fortify your power. The destroyer is coming. I've taken away the power of these other great cities, and I'm coming to take your power too. Look at verse 3. It says, the shield of his mighty men is made red. The valiant men are in scarlet. The chariots shall be with flaming torches in the day of his preparation, and the fir trees shall be terribly shaken. The chariots shall rage in the streets. They shall jostle one against another in the broad ways. They shall seem like torches. They shall run like the lightnings. So continue that visualization. You have your valiant warriors all set up with their shields painted freshly. They're in their best armor. Think of how when the Marines dress up in their nice outfits with their nice hat, clean and crisp. Get your best show up there, right? Be ready for battle. The chariots are going to be filled with torches, and their weapons are all going to be in row, all ready to fight. The noise of the chariots is going to be overwhelming from how many they have. They'll be so plentiful, they're going to run into one another on the streets as they're forming their battle lines. So all of the armies are going to assemble here, and they're going to try to defend against the destruction that God is bringing upon them through the small nation of Babylon, this nation that was nothing. It's from a city as of right now. This destruction's coming, and ultimately Assyria will fall. So even though they have the overwhelming force, they have more power, they're going to be destroyed. Why? Because they're trusting in the wrong thing. Their grandparents understood that it was only God who could save from this destruction. Only God. Their grandparents got the same message from Jonah. Jonah didn't say, repent, you might get a chance. He said, you're going to be destroyed. They took it upon themselves to repent, and God preserved them. Psalm 20, verse 6 tells us, now know I that the Lord saveth his anointed. He will hear him from his holy heaven with the saving strength of his right hand. Some trust in chariots, some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God, They are brought down and fallen, but we are risen and stand upright. Save, Lord. Let the King hear us when we call. Beautiful. It's a beautiful verse, right? So, well, I forgot. I'm sorry. Hang on. How about we give you, since you had at least 3 verses there, we'll throw all 3 at once. Here's 1. Oh, I didn't make it. Here's 2. And here is 3. I didn't make it either. Sorry. Now it's interesting. Oh, sorry, do you have something? Oh, some people view this prophecy regarding the end times and the Antichrist, right? They see this prophecy regarding this mighty armies and all these things that are coming on. And they say that, look, this is the armies that the Antichrist is going to put together. And it's true, right? It's true that the Antichrist is going to bring all these armies, and they're going to trust in their power and in their weapons and in whatever bombs or missiles they bring. But ultimately, they're going to be destroyed. Now, one reason people think that this particular verse is describing the armies of the Antichrist is they read and they say, look, this is actually not describing chariots. This is describing vehicles. The chariots that talks about, they'll rage in the streets. Think about how a motor sounds, right? They shall jostle one against another in the broad ways. They shall seem like torches. What do vehicles look like whenever you look at them at night? They look like rows of lights, coming towards you. They shall run like the lightnings. They'll be very fast. They'll run like on electric or something. So a lot of people see that. And I mean, again, there's some support for that view. For example, when you talk in the book of Revelation about the locusts that have the face of the man, the hair of the women, the tail like a scorpion, they say that kind of looks like a military helicopter, right? And it's going to have chemical warfare. And maybe that's what they're going to use. And when it's talking about the armies of horsemen, maybe those are armies of tanks and cavalry, as we call them, as they come across and they spew fire from their mouths, like we think of the cannon shooting. And that is certainly possible. So they draw that conclusion that maybe these are weapons. But another view, one that I tend to hold more to, is that the creatures of Revelation are just that, demonic creatures. Okay. They're actually a literal army that shows up from the pits of the bottom, from the bottomless pit, right? And they combine their literal locusts with literal toxins. And the horsemen, the same story. They're actually an army, an actual massive army. Now, there is one other, idea is that, well, maybe during the tribulation, all of the fuel sources are destroyed because of all the disasters that happen during the tribulation. And maybe the armies literally do come on horseback. And the interesting thing, a lot of people don't realize, up until I think the 80s, the Russian army still used horseback. A lot of people don't realize that. It was very common. That's how it was their main mode of transportation. It only was less than 100 years ago that tanks came on the scene, right? And even though we think of how many tanks America has, when you think about the number of armies we're talking about, 200 million strong, it's kind of hard to, say that one nation has that many, but who knows? So these are all different views on it. But at the end of the day, regardless what view you take, we certainly see that all the armies in the world and all the military might, no matter how strong you think your nation is, I don't care how many nuclear missiles you have in your arsenal, they mean nothing when it comes to the judgment of God. They mean nothing. Gideon went out with how many people? 10,000. How many did he actually meet and take to the battle? And did he win? Okay, it's not about how strong you are. It matters who does God stand with. That's right. Well, I'm gonna give you the ones I don't like. No, I'm kidding. Twix or Snickers. Just hand it away to someone. It's okay. You already have 20 on your table. So now we get to verse 5. It says, he shall recount his worthies. So the good ones, the best of the best, he's going to count how many of these valiant soldiers he's got. They shall stumble in their walk. They shall make haste to the wall, and the defense shall be prepared. The gates of the river shall be opened, and the palace shall be dissolved. So in our visualization, the mighty heroes of the city, every city had its heroes, right? It's strong warriors that people rallied around. He says, you better number them up. Figure out how many generals and captains and all this stuff you got, because they're going to stumble as they try to go to the wall when the wall begins to fall. They're going to realize their guaranteed defenses are not so guaranteed. They shall run again to try and bolster the defenses. But the very river, by the way, the Tigris River was one of the moats or the barriers to the palace. Well, the Tigris River flooded and took out a huge section of their own wall. Their defense turned against them, right? And it made the city like a pool of water. Their natural moat became their great weakness, right? And then we hear in verse 7, it says, and Hazab shall be led away captive, and she shall be brought up, and her maids shall lead her as with the voice of doves, tabering upon their chest, beating on their chest. So the queen of Nineveh is going to be captured, and her and all her entourage are going to be beating on their chest for the great loss in which they suffer. They'll be led away as captives, and there will be no one to save them. There's no one to go and rescue them. Nineveh in verse 8 says, Nineveh is of old like a pool of water, yet they shall flee away. Stand, stand, shall they cry, but none shall look back. They'll say, stand and fight, defend the city, but no one will. People will run away and abandon it forever. The final king of Nineveh, he sends away his 3 sons and 2 daughters to a neighboring kingdom who was friendly to them, right? Tries to get them to escape, to flee the destruction. And there's remorse and there's regret. But when you leave, there's no coming back. The city was doomed forever, right? They want to see people try to turn back and protect the city, but it's lost. Verse 9 says, take ye the spoil. You can hear the Babylonians screaming, spoil the silver, take the spoil of gold, for there is none end of the store and glory out of all the pleasant furniture. They're screaming, plunder the city till there's nothing left. Take every last drop of treasure they have. Verse 10 says, she is empty. So now you hear the sad ending. She is empty and void and waste. And the heart melteth, and the knees smite together, and much pain is in all loins. And the faces of them all gather blackness. The spoil of the Assyrians is such a big score for the Babylonians. It sets their kingdom up for years to come. There's so much treasure there. According to the chronicles of the Babylonian chronicles, which we have in our museums, it actually says the amount of riches they stopped counting because they couldn't keep records, and they could count pretty high. They stopped trying to keep track of how much they made because of the riches of the city. It was a ruinous heap. That's exactly what it was left as. Nahum describes this defeated Assyrians, says they're so scared their knees are shaking. You ever been so scared that your knees are shaking? You know, I mean, this is how scared they were. This was the undefeated superpower of the world. Does that make anyone think of another nation that tries to trust in itself just a little bit? Okay, unfortunately, right? It ends up in utter humiliation and subjugation. Verse 11 and verse 12 says, where is the dwelling of the lions? Can anybody tell me what the symbol of Assyria was? Whether they carry on all their flags? Big, powerful lion, right? For those of you watching, there's a lion right behind me. That was their symbol. It says, where is the dwelling of the lions and the feeding place of the young lions? Where the lion, even the old lion, walked, and the lion's whelp, where none made them afraid? The lion did tear in pieces enough for his whelps, and strangled for his lionesses. They filled his holes with prey, and his dens with ravin. The Assyrians, they were symbolized by this powerful lion that no one dared disturb, right? And he's like, well, where are you now? Where is this lion? I mean, your reputation as a world power, you were the policeman of the world. You were the authority. Nobody did anything without asking you. The rhetorical question is, do you remember that country that thought so much of themselves? It doesn't look good if a nation turns its back on God, no matter how powerful they think they are. It doesn't look good. They refuse to repent. Absolutely, Ginger. So he says, again, its world power meant nothing. Why? Why did its power mean nothing? All those chariots don't matter. All those missiles and rockets and helicopters don't matter. Well, why? Because verse 13 gives you the answer. The opening of verse 13. Behold, I am against you, saith the Lord of hosts. And I will burn her chariots in the smoke, and the sword shall devour thy young lions. And I will cut off the prey from the earth, and the voice of thy messengers shall be no more heard. The Babylonians thought they did it, right? Nebuchadnezzar was like, man, I'm the dude, right? Look at I'm a great general. But God's from right here, if Nebuchadnezzar would just hear the words of God, he would know who defeated the Assyrians. It wasn't Nebuchadnezzar, it wasn't his father or grandfather. It was God. I am against you. Nineveh was reaping what they had sown. They were going to be brutally destroyed, just as it had brutally destroyed all these other nations in front of them, right? It refused to acknowledge that God is king and even dare to challenge him and his authority over them. And we have this descriptive battle, these details given here. But in a single day, again, as I mentioned earlier, the superpower was overthrown and was replaced by a new superpower because God had turned against them. It's a terrifying thing. His mercy is great, but it doesn't last forever. God was against it because they rejected him, they hated him, and they challenged him knowingly. They knew they were spitting on his face. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. If you're a patriotic person, this should make you feel hurt and scared for your country. Feel the pain that may happen if your nation is turning against God. The countries of the world, they're turning as a whole and mocking God. But they take his, bow of peace with the bow we talked about earlier in the previous session, the bow of mercy and peace and forgiveness, and that I'm not going to destroy the world with water. And they say that let's celebrate the things that you forbid. Let's celebrate the things that you stand against. Let's take his love and care in creation and how he designed everything for perfection. And let's worship instead Mother Nature. Let's worship instead the most evolved being. That's what they think, right? Let's just go worship mankind. Let's take the name of his dear son who died for every single human on the planet. If they would simply accept, he would gladly forgive them. Let's take his name and use it instead for a cuss word when I smash my finger or when I'm angry or when I'm yelling at you. Let's use it as a 4-letter word. Do you kind of see where that might, upset him a little bit, right? You should fear for your nations, especially as I fear for ours, Assyria had unmatched military might, but all the power in the world does not matter against God, whether it's chariots or nuclear missiles, archers, Navy SEALs, same difference. You call it what you want. God is in command, and we as a nation, and particularly as Christians, ought to humble ourselves in his sight. That brings us to an end of chapter 2.